Medical assistance in dying remains a divisive issue in Canada. Earlier, I spoke with Rabbi Jordan Cohen, who has arrived at a rather unexpected conclusion. Thanks for talking with us today, Rabbi Cohen.
Oh, it's a pleasure, Maggie. Thank you for being here.
So, as I was doing my research, learned that you had kind of pivoted, changed your mind about M.A.I.D over the years as you journeyed with some of your congregants who were ill and journeying towards death. Tell me about this.
I don't really think I changed my mind. I don't think I really had a particular position. So it really was about figuring out where I was comfortable, where I stood on the issue, and then ultimately having to share that with my congregation and with my community, who I knew were curious and eager to know where I stood. I guess it was 2016 that Bill C-14 was going to pass and that this was going to become acceptable under law in Canada. The context sort of changed. Before that, when people would ask me where I stood, it was really a theoretical question. Jewish tradition puts primacy on the value of life. We are not supposed to do anything that would hasten end of life and hasten death. And therefore, this really didn't seem to fit in with our tradition. When the law passed and when I began to see that people in our own community were now availing themselves of that option, I realized for myself and for my community, I needed to do a much deeper study and come to a position and share that with them, which I did. And so weighing all that together and talking to a lot of people, on Yom Kippur, our Day of Atonement, our holiest day of the year in 2017, I spoke about it to the congregation. And I concluded and shared with them that I was supportive of the bill and supportive of medical assistance in death if people should so choose that for themselves.
Your stance is not a popular stance within the faith community. There are scriptures that say, "Thou shalt not kill." There is talk of, suicide not being of God. Some people would say this is not compassionate, that palliative care would be an option that people should look at, and taking care of people well at the end of life. What's your response to that, Rabbi?
Oh, I have so many responses to that. To me, compassion and mercy is what it's all about. And, in Jewish tradition, we have two key values, what we refer to as midat hadin and midat rachamim. There is the attribute of law and there is the attribute of mercy or compassion. And they always have to be balanced against one another. Biblical commandments like thou shalt not murder, doesn't say kill, in Hebrew it says murder, or any sort of prohibitions within the religious tradition against suicide. I don't see this as suicide. I see this as a very conscious choice, and that's where Jewish tradition and Canadian law come into conflict. Jewish tradition sees personal choice in terms of life and death almost as irrelevant. That we are created in the image of God, that human life takes precedent over anything else. In the book of Ecclesiastes, it says there's a time to be born and a time to die. And what's actually missing from the text is any indication of who determines when that time is. And we've always assumed that it was talking about God. But I started to read that text a little bit differently. But it says a time to be born and a time to die. And yet we've taken it out of God's hands in so many ways with birth, with fertility clinics and even birth control. We've taken that decision and we're going to decide whether or not we're going to create life or not. So why is that any different? Why is the determination of the time to be born any different than the determination of the time to die? And in the end, in balancing those attributes of law and compassion, I basically came to the conclusion that if we're going to err, I'd rather err on the side of compassion.